All right. We are coming up on the end of like the last 20 or so minutes.
Holy moly.
I do want to make sure we talk with Salvatore because Salvatore has been waiting on the line for a little bit. So let's jump on with him, Salvatore in Louisiana. Welcome to the show. Welcome back.
Hey, good morning, y'all. I guess it's afternoon now.
Little bit. You're a little bit low.
Okay. We got it.
Bumped you up? Perfect.
I can speak up.
No,
All right.
we fixed you on our end.
Okay. Hey guys, so I called. We were talking about atheopaganism or atheopagans about a couple of weeks ago. Oh, and I have another thing to add from a call months ago, but I didn't want to forget that. So you thrown out a comment at one point, like kind of playing in the space of reality and unreality, and it was a really interesting comment. I wanted to call and kind of expand on that a little bit.
Sure. Happy to hear I had an interesting comment.
Yeah. So, I see the gods as archetypes. They're not existent outside of that. But when I step into a ritual space and step into a space with people for a ritual, we kind of set aside that skepticism and I interact with the gods as real. And when you talk about playing with reality and unreality, like in the back of my head, I'm like, this is not a god. Mm-hmm. But in this space, in this time, for this period, I will choose to interact that way with them. With this idea in my head. Does that make sense?
I think it does. I think that's exactly the same thing that we do when we read a fantasy novel or watch the horror movie. It's like, no one's going to come to my door with an axe, but in this moment, I'm invested in this story. Sure, I'll play into that. Yeah. The caveat here, and of course, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Salvatore.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm excited, so I was trying to jump in.
Go for it.
That's a really good point because fiction teaches truth, but it's not necessarily factual. Making that distinction, and there's important lessons that we learn from fiction about the human condition. So, relating that to a story, that was a connection I hadn't made. My brain was like, "Oh, that's awesome." So anyway, go ahead.
I think Eric's gonna ask a little bit more about fact versus truth. I think he perked up there for a minute.
Yeah.
Okay.
You said fiction teaches truth. If you want to break Eric, say fiction teaches truth. But I get the deeper conversation being had here. I would just, as the pedant among other pedants, because I think everyone who watches and enjoys the show is one. I wouldn't say fiction teaches truth. If you want to argue that, I'd be down, but
fiction,
I'd workshop that.
It's catchy. Fiction has the potential to convey true things, even if the situations being portrayed did not factually happen. I think we can all agree on that.
It's called allegory.
Illuminate something about our. Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, go for it.
In my understanding of it, and truth is just a really catchy way to say it. But it reveals something about the human condition. It helps illuminate something about our lives and can help us to make positive changes in our lives.
Sure. Yeah. I think those can be summed up as allegory, metaphor, and poetry.
Right. Yeah. And here's the thing. I get it. And I know that there are a lot of hardline atheists who don't feel like that is useful or maybe actively harmful. And in certain contexts, I agree. I think that if that flexibility in that playing in that space of saying, I know this isn't actually true or reflective of reality, but for this moment, because it's going to benefit me and my mental state or this ritual or whatever, I'm going to pretend like it is and really get into that headspace. And for that 15 minutes or hour or 2 hours, this is real. If that's all, that's fine. But I think the problem that could arise from that is then giving that leeway to people who would then use that playing in that space and claiming things are real to do harm, right? So if you say So playing devil's advocate here for a minute, Salvatore, if you say, for the next 30 minutes, I'm going to be doing this ritual that speaks to me, makes me feel good, connects me with the people around me. And in those 30 minutes, the gods that I believe in are real because that's helpful. And that is what I've chosen to believe at this time. And then afterwards, I'm going to put that down in the same way I would put down a novel or end a podcast and move on with my life. And then somebody else says, well, I'm also going to pretend for the next 30 minutes that my God is real, but my God allows me to kill you. And so for those 30 minutes, that's okay. Or maybe I'll extend that. Maybe it's for a week, maybe it's the purge situation. At what point do we draw that distinction? And how are we speaking about this in a way that explicitly condemns that second group?
I'd have to argue that it's by not using the words "I accept that this is true," even for a small amount of time, ever, because I don't think you can. I'm sure both you, Salvatore, and V have watched Pixar movies, right? Like, have you seen Toy Story?
Yes, sir.
I didn't need to, for the time that movie was playing, accept that Buzz and Woody were real in order to connect. Instead, I was able to put myself in the headspace, and that's great. But I wouldn't define that, because, you're riveted. You're watching these movies. It makes you cry, all of that. You're invested in the characters. You can be invested. You can have an emotional response. You can connect. You can, all of those things, and not need to say that you're accepting for any amount of time that it's real. I just would take that language and put it on the shelf and only pull it out when it's needed. I would not play kickball with it when I'm not trying to denigrate, the ritual that you do. Doing that ritual is fantastic. You're enjoying it. That's fantastic. I don't think that you need to accept that it's real. And if you're just invested in that and you're finding yourself getting into it, I don't think that that's accepting it as real. I think that we can just really get into things. I would imagine, what immediately comes to mind is the Assassin's Creed games, playing Assassin's Creed. And then everywhere I go, I'm just looking for handholds to scale buildings. Like, that's just, the world now is just something to play on. At no point playing it or afterwards did I accept that it was true for it to have an incredible impact on me. It just, I would divorce that language.
What are your thoughts?
And I also want to know what yours are, V. But you first, Salvatore.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm processing right now. My brain is kind of clicking. So over the V, why don't you? I hadn't. V, why don't you go? Process.
Sounds good.
I'm not a professional podcaster to process this quickly.
I'm trying to be a little bit more considerate and letting the callers speak first, because I know we've had some issues in the past just talking over for the whole time. But you take your time. I'll engage with this first, and hopefully that's helpful. So I think ultimately that's, if we're going to talk about this component, I think if we could get everyone else on the same page, it would be helpful, but I don't think that that's a realistic expectation. So the way that we use real is so varied and has so much, it has such a spectrum of what it could mean, that in this argument, to make this philosophical case, premise A, premise B, premise C, if we are using real in this way, we have to use it throughout. Agree with you 100%. My concern is less about whether or not we could make the case with a specific definition of real and utilize that in that sense, and then use other words for other things that we mean.
Genuine.
My concern is that we cannot expect everybody who engages with the world like Salvatore does to be that particular with their words at all times, to the exclusion of things like, poetic language or evocative language, so that hopefully somebody on the other side of things who would use a similar mindset to do something bad thinks about it and says, well, they didn't say it was real, so I guess that's why I'm not going to engage in this same thought process.
But then it's just using that language to concede to no one for no good reason. I feel like that further now gives no reason why that language should be used.
Well, there's no reason why it should be used. It just is. It's just a brute fact that people are going to use the word real to mean it was really in love with this person, or
but
this really hit me. Didn't really hit you. It's a concept. Concepts can't hit you. But
just in this context, we're talking about ontological.
Right, but I'm agreeing with you that ontologically, your concern makes sense, and in this isolated space, that is a really good way to distinguish between one worldview and another. My concern, and the concern that I had brought to Salvatore, was in the real world outside of this isolated space. Okay. Where we're talking about ontology specifically.
People who are following at home, ontology specifically deals with what exists, which makes it separate from things like axiology and epistemology. For more information on that, you can go to V's channel and watch How to Skeptic, that does an incredible breakdown of that. Go ahead, sorry.
Well, thank you. Appreciate that.
It was good.
So, hey guys.
Yeah, what's up? Salvatore, your thoughts.
Okay, all right. So the discussion about what is real and what is not, I get that. And again, the language, even in the phone call, is metaphorical and hardcore. Mm-hmm. Those are good ways to describe it. So,
cool.
In the pagan community, there is this discussion in the wider pagan community about how do you hard polytheism versus soft polytheism versus atheopaganism, and everyone I've talked to about this, they're like, oh yeah, they're familiar with the discussion and the concept. So maybe that's maybe it's just such a niche community that the idea that these ideas are easily communicated that way. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. That happens all the time in the atheist community as well.
Okay. We could publish a dictionary.
And so I think it's, when I use those terms, it's like I'm using them like I would around a fire pit or something, right. And everyone gets it. But I understand, like for you guys, when you hear real, it may have a different connotation. And I was a little...
Yeah.
Well, I mean, when we're used to arguing with people about things that they believe are ontologically real, then it puts you in a headspace. And so when somebody calls in and says, hey, I think that this thing is real, and I'm looking at your description, and I'm atheopaganism, okay. So the paganism is... Okay, but we're talking about what's real. Okay, so is there some kind of woo here? Is there something going on here that might be magical that this person is holding on to?
Life is magical, Eric.
V?
Oh, look, I can do a whole nother phone call about what I think about magic.
Oh, I honestly, Salvatore, I think that we would get along.
I'm not hosting.
Great. I think that we honestly would have some really awesome conversations. Here's the deal. I totally get where you're coming from. I absolutely do. I was in that headspace for a very long, long time, and I think that I still kind of am. But I think that the realization that you just had, and that drawing between two different communities using the same word, by the way, exactly what I was saying in the conversation just now, Eric, is that,
and that's what helped. Yeah.
Right, there are different communities use the words differently, and we can't expect them all to use the word the same exact way in order to, use that as our safeguard against concerns. We have to find other things. So I don't know. Salvatore, this was awesome. We're going to need to wrap up and read out the super chats and end out everything. But thank you so much for calling back, and feel free to call in again.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Look, happy birthday. And I wish I had time for my second thing I said at the beginning, but maybe I'll call back about it.
Absolutely do.
Yeah.
All right.
Take care.
Bye.